How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Great. I love your shirt.
Oh, thank you, man. I obviously wore it on purpose.
Yeah. I had on my Maxi shirt earlier. I got one offline. I was loving his game last night. So,
Well, I'm glad to have you on here, Coach, because it's funny. I don't think I knew you much at all when I would, during my year of 2001, and really just from like following you and the team every year, every season, just seeing what the team's up to. I'd say of all the sports, the men's basketball team is the only team I actually keep up with every year.
well, I was fortunate. I see you around school, but yeah, I mean, I started, I think, when you were already in high school. My
Hmm.
first year was like 98, 99. I remember like my first class I taught was like Tom Pettit's class, and like Tommy Gangemi's class. That was eighth grade. And then I was just sort of watching my first year. I think I might have did baseball at the middle school my first year. I didn't coach any basketball. And so I think Brady, Finnegan, those guys might have been like juniors.
Hmm.
Um, they might have been sophomores, and I came on, I think, maybe their junior year as an assistant coach.
Hmm.
And then my first year as head coach was with Matt Brady, Danny Capolella, Brian Finnegan. They were my senior captains. And I was fortunate to benefit from Jack Spinella, the coach before me. He had started George Cortez, Earl Stout,
That was my
Drew
class.
Moyer, Bill. Yeah, he started those guys. And so I got them as experienced juniors, which is a nice benefit. So, but it was neat because I got to know kids around Wiss through them. You know what I mean? Because kids would come to the game and I would see them, and I would see certain kids, act like wild fans and do that. I was like, oh, who's that kid? Because I'm fortunate. I've been doing this 20 something years now. I know most of the kids now at the high school games because I've taught them in the middle school. Or I've seen them in the middle school. But that group, your class, like I didn't really know them other than to see them at games, see
Hmm.
them at football games, soccer events. And it was neat. And for me, it was a treat because I had been about 10 years away from Wissahickon School District. It's where I graduated from. So it was neat to get back and feel that blue and gold spirit again. So it was fun.
Yeah. So, what class were you? Graduating class would you have been at Wissahickon?
Class in 1985.
85. Good year. I was 2 years
Yeah.
old.
Yeah. Yeah, I was way back then.
So,
So
where did you grow up then? Were you from Ambler?
so yes and no. It's sort of like I was I guess what they call sort of a lower Gwinnett kid. But I wasn't really,
Yeah.
my mail address was Ambler, but I lived right around the corner from the high school
Okay.
and the middle school. So if you went down through the woods and made a left on Knight Road, came to that stop sign at the bottom, I was the second house on the left. I always found it funny when I
Hmm.
came to back to teach, and I remember at the middle school there was an announcement telling the students on your way home, use the sidewalk, do not walk through the woods. And my first thing was, how do you get home that way? Because I mean, that's all I knew was walking through the woods. I was like, what do you mean don't walk through the woods? That's where all the fights happen. That's where we used to sprint down there, to see what was going on. And that's all we did was cut through the woods. And I was thinking like, oh, today's climate, they don't want kids walking where they can't see them. But I just remember like, no, don't walk through the woods. That just sounded insane to me. So
I lived also, down Hendrick Street, on
okay.
Edgewood Drive, and likewise, that was the only way to go that way. You never
Yeah.
made the proper street turns. You went through the
Right, right,
woods.
right. If you cut through the woods, even if it took 3 minutes, 4 minutes, you were taking the shortcut. I think the only time we didn't go through it was rainy and muddy, but even sometimes I think we went through when it was rainy just to hopefully the leaves would keep some of the rain off us or something. The woods would protect us a little, but yeah, it was funny. I remember hearing that. But yeah, I grew up right around the corner from the school. So
Wow, that's so cool. Then you coming back. When you were in Wissahickon, then what was your? I guess what was like the school like? We've talked to some people, mainly whose students whose parents had gone to Wissahickon.
yeah.
But Miss McCracken, who I talked to, also went to Wissahickon.
Yeah,
So
she was a little bit ahead of me. But I loved it. I mean, to me, I still remember the first time I was taking a postgraduate course, as a teacher, and the professor of the course asked, how many of you enjoyed your high school experience? And it's a room full of other, teachers. So I'd say 90% of the hands went up. And then when he said, how many you didn't, there was 3. And I was like, oh, wow. I had never thought, it was a great eye opener, talk about perspective, because school was fun. You know what I mean? That's where all my buddies were. That's where all the pretty girls were. You know what I mean? That's where I was one in high school, other than a suspension. I had a perfect attendance. You know what I mean?
Wow.
I didn't miss a day. And my parents were the type that if I was sick, it was like, go to school. If you don't feel better in a little while, call. But by the time I was there with my buddy, they're like, well, might as well stay to lunch. Then once you stay to lunch, might as well stay to the end of the day. But yeah, it was a fun place. I really enjoyed it. I loved sports when I was growing up. I was I always try to when I tell my students, I was a bit of a class clown, but I knew where the line was drawn. Like as soon as the teacher used my name, I knew I'd gone too far, because most of my stuff I tried to do in the shadows. I tried to be the one not caught. I tried to set my buddies up to get in trouble, or do things like that. But as soon as they said Mr. Wilson, I was like, my hands were up, like, got me. Sorry. No need to call home. No need to let anybody know. But I was definitely one that enjoyed being in school and loved the fun of being in an educational environment.
When you were a kid, you mentioned sports. When you were young, as you're coming up through elementary school, what were you into, as a kid?
I played baseball. Basketball was sort of something that came on a little bit later. I wanted to do football. I remember at a very young age, my dad, and when I just started really liking basketball to the point that I was like, man, I think this is my sport. My dad was a huge baseball. My dad played at Ambler High School and broke a lot of records there. So I always thought, like, well, my dad played baseball. I should, at least give it a good go. But I was great at the beginning of the season until one of those pitches came high and inside or hit me. And I probably stood as far away from a plate as you could to try to still hit the ball. So I think I lacked the toughness for the contact of baseball and football. And I remember my dad walking me across Pickering Field for, I think it was at that time, WAC football. I think Bob Osgood might even been running it back then. And I remember heading across the field and my dad saying, if you get hurt during football season, you might miss some of basketball season. I don't think my foot took another step. I think I stopped. I was like, no, I think I don't know if I want to do this, Dad, because I really was starting to love basketball, around the 6th, 7th grade age. And that's where I really, started to enjoy that. And I was one of those kids that, because we explored a lot with the kids in my neighborhood, I felt like we grew up like the movie Sandlot. We were on our bikes, riding through those woods, up where it's now the administration building, but there was a huge playground there that had a court that you could dunk on. And so we were either playing basketball there, playing wiffle ball or something in somebody's backyard, and so it was just a great area. And I remember what I loved about when I went away to college was that I always felt the diversity of Wissahickon had prepared me well for going other places.
Interesting.
I think the one thing that probably did prepare, I had never, like when I went to Susquehanna University, there were only, I want to say it was five African-American guys on campus.
Wow.
So I knew when I went there and spoke to the coach about attending and going to play basketball there. And he said, we don't have a great deal of diversity, et cetera. I was thinking like, okay, minimal, but I was still thinking it would be more. There was only 3 or 4 black women and like 5 black guys on campus. Like, whoa. I was like, that was a bit of a shock, but everything else I was prepared for, I went to school with, so Jewish, Asian, you name it. Like you were very accepting of everyone. It's just how the environment was that we grew up in, but it was weird to be somewhere that was less accepting at times of me. And that was something I was like, oh, so I'm not used to hearing the N word and not having my boys somewhere nearby.
Yeah. What do you do?
And you really had to like, how am I going to respond in this situation? And thank goodness I was fortunate. I had some really good teammates that one was from Abington, another one was from Easton, and they always had my back. Let's just put it that way. And so if something went down, it was not even we have your back. It was almost a step in front, like, hey, this isn't going to happen here. And it made my years there at Susquehanna, and eventually I transferred to Millersville, but it made my time there much more enjoyable and much more comfortable knowing I had individuals that were ride or die, being in an environment where I was like, how is this going to go down? Because, when I grew up with Wiss, if something went down, you always had your buddies, your friends, you know, you had support, or
Right.
you knew if something went down, you had backup, somebody would step in if things got real crazy. But when you're, you know, 2.5, 3 hours away and in an environment where you're like, man, my nearest backup's a 2.5, 3 hour ride. Like, you know, when somebody uses the N word or does something inappropriate, you're sort of like, man, what do you do here? And it was something I wasn't used to because, and not to say there wasn't racism at Wiss when I went through it. It wasn't something that was in the forefront. You know, we got along. It was a great environment. And it was a fun place to go to school. And when you play sports, a lot of that stuff just sort of washes to the side anyway. So
Something that I've talked to a lot of students about was, you know, that impression of when I would look around the hallways and I've kind of like used the you know the groups that you would see of like the black kids over at the end of K Hall
yeah,
and the group of white kids over here and when I've talked to students, they've often talked about like their friend group being pretty similar to them.
yeah,
I'm biracial, so I grew up you know, I grew up in Ambler with around black kids, white kids, but really my best friends, the friends I hung out with on a daily basis were all white.
right.
What was your I know you said that you got along with everyone but what was like your mix of friends like as a kid?
So when I was doing my Sandlot group, it was funny. It was probably the kids right in my neighborhood. They would probably be predominantly, I want to say predominantly white, but another kid, Dan Johnson, around the corner, I would hang with another guy, a legendary kid, Courtney Holmes. But I want to say that was more as I got into 7th, 8th grade and I got more involved in basketball, particularly. And, you know, it's funny. I never thought of that way. Like as I got into 7th, 8th, I think I sort of gravitated towards more of the kids that were football, basketball, and it was a lot of the minority kids that I, you know, hung up with. And I knew before elementary school, because even though I was an Ambler kid, my family roots are Penland. And
Okay.
so my dad is one of 8, you know what I mean? And all of his siblings, you know, were Penland born and raised. They came up from Virginia when my grandfather moved up. So, you know, my holidays were always down at the school field in Penland, playing with my cousins and stuff like that. So, you know, you got to school, it was sort of like, well, isn't he your friend? I was like, well, yeah, but that's my cousin. You know what I mean? My grandmother was one of 9. My grandfather was one of 7. So I had a lot of cousins coming through Wiss when I played on the high school basketball team as a sophomore. My cousin Alfie Wilson was a junior. My cousin Lenny Wilson was a senior. Like, and it felt like there was a Wilson that was on the team every year when I came through. So they were just, you couldn't hide from all your cousins and family. So I want to say at a younger age, playing, you know, wiffle ball and doing stuff in the neighborhood, probably I would say the majority of the kids were white where I was. And then, you know, as I got into 7th, 8th grade, you know, I think it was a mix of them because, you know, in basketball and, you know, other sports, you know, that's where it was. It was a mix of kids. So I felt very comfortable. It's funny. I actually started to do tennis in 9th grade.
Oh, wow.
I had real no background in tennis, but I knew I wanted to do another sport, and I pretty much given up on baseball. Like I said, the pitches coming inside wasn't for me.
Same fear.
I knew I wasn't doing football. And right as I started to do tennis in 9th grade, my dad had found a program over in Abington, this gentleman, Sam Rhines. And that's where I started doing year-round basketball 3 to 4 nights a week. And just I wanted to get better. And it paid off. As a senior, I was able to go on and play in college, you know, and, you know, enjoy the fruits of working so hard and laboring to become a better player. Because I was a late bloomer at best.
Well, you mentioned your fear of baseball and maybe not being able to play basketball if you had played football. What was it that drew you to basketball? You mentioned, you know, class of '85, so I'm imagining 6th, 7th grade. That's when Dr. J first comes to the Sixers. Is that the influence? What was the influence for basketball being the primary, especially since you weren't that good?
Yeah, I would say through. You know, it's funny. I had a crazy experience in. I want to say it had to be like 5th, 6th, 7th grade. WAC basketball, like it was a 3 to 4 grade age group that you played in. So the kids that were at the top end were really, really good. Mm-hmm. And I played on a team, we were called the Celtics, and which was horrible to have if you're living in the Philadelphia area, but that was our team. Green shirts, green WAC shirts. Oh. Our first 2 years, if we played 20 games, I want to say we won maybe 2 games. But then as we became the older guys, like the 6th and 7th graders, 7th, 8th graders, we were beating everybody. And I said, man, this is fun. I just really enjoyed the game. But on that team, I was still, in a rec league, was probably third or fourth guy. Mm-hmm. And then I remember I was a huge Dr. J fan. Love the afro. I think probably every other year my Halloween costume was my afro and a sweatsuit and a little thing that said Dr. J there. Yeah. It's the weakest costume, but that's what I wore. But I remember hearing about Mo Cheeks, and I just loved him as a point guard. And I remember when he came in, he's from Texas Christian. I forget where Mo Cheeks was from, but he wasn't a great shooter. But when he got to the Sixers by his second or third year, if he was open, it was money. And there wasn't, I don't think there was a 3-point line there right away, but he was one that I remember hearing that like he would shoot 400, 500 shots a day to become a better shooter. And I kept thinking like, why? So I became probably a staple in my neighborhood. If you drove down Knight Road, oh, there's that Wilson kid out front again shooting. And I would just shoot. And I'd get home, get my homework done because my mom wouldn't let me go out to shoot unless that was done first. And I'd be out in front of my house, shooting within 20 minutes. I made sure my homework was done quickly and I would be out there for hours. I'd come in and eat, go back out and shoot. And then there was also on the side of the middle school, there were basketball courts right where the middle school tennis courts are. Okay. They got rid of them years ago, but I would walk up, I would dribble ball between my legs back and forth the whole way up to the middle school. And if there were a few guys up there playing, we'd play. And then when I got probably 8th grade, 9th grade, and I could ride my bike, I'd ride to either Penn Glen and play. I'd ride to Knights Park and Ambler. I'd even cruise down past Pickering Field, see if anybody was playing. And I would just look for games to play. And then once I knew there was a regular, hey, we play on Tuesday or we're going to be out there this day. Because we didn't have cell phones to message each other. Right. So you just tried to get there and hope there were guys out there playing. And if it was 2-on-2, 3-on-3, you just played. And so that sort of was my progression, through high school, is just playing basketball every moment I could.
So it's funny, because you mentioning being afraid of the baseball, and that was definitely a thing for me. In fact, it was George Cortez who was famous. my 1 year doing majors, George Cortez was a pitcher, and he would always get me in the right thigh, and that was like the thing. That was my last year. I just couldn't do it anymore. But similarly, when I would play pickup games, we had a court in our neighborhood when I lived in South Ambler. Okay. So we'd play down there, but then the Pickering Field and the Knights Park Field, when we'd be up there for baseball, my dad would always tell me, he'd say, see, that's where like you go to get better. You got to go play with the bigger kids, with the older kids. And I was always so afraid because even just in my neighborhood, we'd play with kids who would throw the elbows or they'd cinch up and then they'd throw their butt into you when you're trying to play defense. And I was so afraid that everything was going to like break out into a fight or I was just going to get beat up. Or did you, playing with older kids, that's tough, right? How did you acclimate to that pressure?
I think I was very fortunate. I've been blessed to see those individuals that put me under their wing. When I was a freshman, my sister was a senior. And I somehow, out of 16, 18 grandchildren, I'd never counted how many there are on the Wilson side. I think I'm the tallest at 6 foot. Wow. Probably now at this age and weight, I'm probably 5'11". I might have shrunk a little, but I would go up to the courts, and Wissahickon had a phenomenal player. He's in the Big Five Hall of Fame, a guy, Bob Wojcicki. His brother, Steve Wojcicki, was 82. Another guy, Terry Samuels, Aaron Dean. And when I would go up, the older guys would all be playing, even if I was in 8th grade. And I would just stand on the sideline dribbling, just wanting to get in. And finally, like after a game or two, when they started to get tired, Aaron Dean or Terry Samuels was like, hey, let him play. That's Tracy's little brother. That's, I would get on there. And I knew, like, don't fire up a ton of shots. Just move the ball. Show that you belong on the court. Don't act like a fool. And little by little, they would allow me on the court. When I would go, and that was usually up at the middle school, when I would go to Knights Park and to other places, there was that fear that, like, man, these are older guys, like, and there was that learning process of standing your ground when you call next and somebody walks up and says, nah, we got next. And you're like, nah, man, I've been here. I was very fortunate. As I mentioned, my cousins that were a couple years ahead of me, my cousin Len, who was 2 years ahead of me, everybody knew him as Crunch. He was the enforcer. I mean, like, there were a lot of people you mess with. He wasn't one of them. And I remember being in games, 10th grade, whatever it might be, 9th grade, out on the courts at Knight Park or something, and words went back and forth. A foul went one way, and it was a discrepancy. And I say, okay, I got to stand my ground. And I'm thinking, man, this guy might knock me out, but I still got to stand here, either take the punch or throw a punch. And somebody would usually walk up behind the guy and you hear a, I was like, what are you whispering? The guy's like, well, okay, I'm going to let you go today. And I'm thinking like, what happened? And somebody would go, he told him that Crunch was your cousin. And I was like, so literally my older cousin, his reputation probably got me out of a lot of scuffles. I was ready to go, but it fizzled. I had my share, but most of them fizzled because they knew like, man, I don't want his cousin coming after me. Even to the extent that, do you remember Mr. Lowe?
Yeah.
So Mr. Lowe is my uncle.
Oh.
So his mother and my mother's sister, he's a cousin, but we call him Uncle Ralph. And he was our JV basketball coach when I was there. So in 10th grade, my cousin Crunch, and I was down with 3 of the guards, were under the basket. My uncle was known for doing the most physical rebounding drills. And the drill was basically, I'm going to throw it up to begin. The last person to get 3 baskets is the loser and has conditioning. So I'm in with 3 like varsity guards, me and another JV guard, and it's pretty much the ball is up, knock somebody down, get the ball, try to put it back in, because it was sort of to test your toughness, your physicality, who's going to battle out there. And so I grabbed a rebound off his first shot, put it in. So I'm up 1, everybody's trying to score. I think this other kid, Greg King, he grabbed the ball, put it in. I grabbed it a second time as I went up. He just hit me in the back of the head with an elbow, and I went down. So I was like, okay, I know it's a toughness drill, but this is a basketball. So I was thinking, when I get up to my feet, I'm swinging. I got up. That kid wasn't anywhere in sight. My cousin had already had him against the wall by his shirt and was up, and my uncle was grabbing him saying, let him go, Crunch, let him go. And it was just one of those things. It was sort of like a reputation. One, you don't mess with Crunch, and you don't mess with any of his cousins or relatives. And it was sort of one of those things that then what made it worse is anywhere we went, now I had to live up to like, oh, he's a Wilson. I'm like, yeah, but I'm not really that Wilson, but I guess I'm going to have to, if I need to, throw some hands here if I have to, and make sure my cousin doesn't think I'm a wimp here. So, but it was good, and it just sort of learned, like, stand your ground. You may get your butt kicked, you may not, and it's one of the things that I really, with our guys, even playing up to this year, when I can get alumni, whether it's to an outdoor court somewhere, I don't always just try to get our good alumni. I try to get some of the ones that I know will cut corners and call fouls and hack and say, I didn't foul, because I want our kids to say, hey, you got to stand your ground. At some point, the game's not about being nice. There's nothing wrong with having a little bit of an edge to you. It's just the nature of competition, and there's no other way to say it. Doesn't mean you have to be a dick on the court. You know what I mean? But you can go out there and compete and afterwards still shake hands, even though you played with an edge and had a bit of nastiness to you. And so I always try to tell my kids, this isn't a popularity contest. You got to be a little tough and play hard. And I say, I learned the hard way. I said, I'm going to give you a shortcut to it. Go out there. I said, be the one to either, basically metaphorically pop the other team in the mouth. Don't wait for them to knock you to the ground. Be the more physical, be the more aggressive team out there. And I feel, it's just something I picked up growing up, running around Amberg, playing on the courts at Penn Land. And it was funny because when I would play down at Penn Land, it was against other cousins. So my cousin Len wasn't stepping in for any of that. I was like, hey, that's you and your cousin Milt. You're on your own.
Out.
That's you and this cousin. You're on your own. You're both my cousins. So it was pretty much, sink or swim, and so it was always good from that nature. And they were always in an environment at the Penn Land school field where they had scuffled a good bit, So when I came in, my first couple, when I caught that first one on the chin, I was like, ooh, so that's what a punch feels like, you get the old cousin shove you back in there. Hey, don't back down, stay in there. I'm like, really? I got to continue. He caught me. Can't we call it over? And you just had to keep on, stepping up. But it was an eye-opening experience. But I always felt it was a little bit, when I look back, a little bit insulated because it was your cousins. You knew you weren't going to get stomped into the ground by somebody. It was, you're going to understand where you are in the pecking order, and it was getting real quickly established. But, it was part of growing up around family in such a big district. And it's funny, now coaching, I've had cousins come through. I now I'm coaching kids of players I want to coach. My best player this year is Earl Stout.
Hmm.
Earl's son, and he's just phenomenal young man. In the hallway today, I'm looking at a young kid, and I'm hoping he comes to the high school, but he's a really talented kid, Caden Cortez, George's son, and
Wow.
so and he's been coming to my camps for years, which is wonderful, young man that it's neat to look back and go, wow, I've known these kids since they were babies, and it's with having coached their fathers, it's neat to watch and see the tendencies that they have. Caden, first of all, Earl is a tremendous basketball player and athlete, much different player than his dad. And Caden, like George, is one of those kids. I haven't seen all the other sports, but all the kids tell me how phenomenal he is. And you mentioned in George, I still remember when George was either a junior or a senior talking to Justin Hammond, and they were telling me how good of an athlete George was. And I was like, really? Because I knew he was a good basketball player, and he just had a tenacious desire to win. But I was always amazed that I think Hammond said if George was to come out to soccer, he'd be one of our best, if not our best soccer players right now. And somebody said, well, if he came out for baseball, he'd be one of our best. And I was like, wow, he's that good of an athlete. And you could watch on the basketball court that he just had certain skills, but I think his best asset, he was just a killer on the court. He just hated to lose. He's very competitive.
There were a few kids like that, and that was where, like, like I mentioned, going to play pickup ball, and there was just a clear delineation between my skill set in all of the sports and kids like George, Earl, Steve Johnson was another one
Steve
growing
Johnson,
up that
yeah.
were just like
Fast.
incredible. And I couldn't, no matter what it was, I was always on the B team. I was always, coming in on the second line, whatever it was. And I think that's why I eventually gravitated towards the arts because
Yeah.
at a certain point,
when you say that, I know your pain. When I was literally middle school, if they had 14 kids, I was number 13 or 14. And I got lucky by the time, like I said, I got to ninth grade, I got a little bit better. So I was like eighth or ninth man. And then JV, I was like the starting point guard, but for 2 years. And I didn't start varsity till I was a senior and play varsity. Like even my junior year, I might have sat on a couple of varsity games, but I was pretty much JV, even as a junior. And it just so happened a new coach came in and he saw my potential and then immediately said, you're my starting point guard. The kid who was a starting point guard, he's like, you're going to shooting guard. And we're, or no, he actually took that guy, said, you're going to the bench. This other kid who was a junior became our starting shooting guard. And just, he changed our lineup. And, I sort of benefited from that. But like I said, there were other guys there was a guy like, his name was, what was the guy, Stevie, you just mentioned?
Steve Johnson.
Steve Johnson. We had a guy in 85 named Stevie Smith. If you
Okay.
ever get into the high school and see the track records that are still up there, Stevie Smith still holds a considerable amount of them. He won the states in the 100-yard dash and 200-yard dash sophomore, junior, and senior year. And I want to say he placed top 3 as a freshman. He went on and went on to Temple to play football, but he didn't play all 4 years. But he was, outstanding. One of the first freshmen to ever play varsity as a ninth grader. It was just unheard of moving a kid up, but he was just so fast. So he did punt returns and kick returns, and he was this lightning fast kid. And it just reminded when Steve Johnson came along, I said, man, we had a kid like that all year. Because I remember Steve Johnson was so fast,
Mm-hmm.
and there were kids ahead of me that were just, the kid Stevie Smith was just so athletic, but he wasn't a skilled basketball player. And when the new coach came on, he's like, well, yeah, he's fast and he's athletic, but he's like, he makes 5 turnovers and then 7 steals. He's like, that's not a winning combination, And I was a little more sound and fundamental and probably a more conservative pick for him to run the point and do things the way he wanted to be done. And I just was fortunate from there. And then he took me to visit colleges, and that's where I went on to play in school. But yeah, it's amazing that the athletic kids that come through Wissahickon
Mm-hmm.
and the ones that we keep, because we lose a lot to the LaSalle's, the GAs, because it just seems like for them a better option. They want me, and a lot of kids are sold on that. They're recruiting me. They want me. And I always tell my kids, as being a coach of 27 years, we want you too. We just don't recruit you. You're already in our school.
Right. You're here.
So, yeah.
What kind of student were you?
I would say probably a B student.
Okay.
I definitely wasn't an A, B student. I should have been, but I think because my parents
We all should have been.
Right, but I think because my parents were willing to accept that, okay, you got B's and you get an A here or C there. Okay, fine. They would definitely not accept all C's or any D's on anything, because school always seemed to come fairly easy. It wasn't until college that I realized, man, I got to really sit down and study. I felt like in high school, I could prepare a night or two before. I could go over my notes, and I was one who was, I was very calculating. I knew, like, okay, this is a big test. I got to pay attention on this unit. Okay, this unit's not too bad. But if I follow along in class, I'm going to pick it up and do well on the test. But when I got to college, and I was also I wasn't a big partier in high school. When I say that, my senior year, yes. My junior year, before that, I really didn't do alcohol before then. And when I got to college, I was like, what? There's nobody telling me when I have to be in my room. There's no so, we were, going out and drinking, Monday night football, Friday nights, So it was one of those things. I ended my first mark period in college with like a 1.5. Wow. And I remember my coach called me in and said, hey, he said, if you don't have a 2.0 by the end of the school year, you don't get to come back. And I was like, what? And I was like, huh. And I was like, I knew my parents were paying a good amount of money for me to go to this university. And I liked the opportunity of playing basketball. I think I had like a 3.0 or 2.7 the next mark period and got my grade up above a 2.0. But that's where I realized, like, instead of sitting in my room playing video games, and we had the old like Nintendo system, me and my roommate drinking a beer, I'm watching one of my teammates walk across the field to the lecture hall or something. Where are you going? He goes, it's quiet over the lecture hall. I'm going to go study. And I'm like, maybe I ought to try doing that as well. Cause I knew he had a 3.5 the first semester. And that was the first time I realized, like, I got to figure out how to really sit down and study, because I was able to get away with just being a solid student in high school with not doing a ton of studying, but I enjoyed school. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't like I didn't study because I think it was important. I was just like, okay, I get a B. A B is very good. I don't need to be excellent,
Well, when you're at that age, there's always like this pressure to kind of, you were going to Susquehanna at first. So what did you think you wanted to, like, you were going to go to Susquehanna and do what? What was your dream?
So my high school coach, the guy who came in, his name was Bob Ambler. He was an account. He worked in business, and he taught like accounting and all the business courses at the school. And his classes were fun. Like, everybody wanted to sign up for him. He was just a real enjoyable teacher. And I kept thinking, like, man, that's a great, way to go to college. Like, get your degree in business with a certification in teaching or something along the lines of math. And this way, if you really don't enjoy teaching, you can go into the business world and have that to fall back on. And I remember getting to Susquehanna, and I think it was an economics course that I had. And it was a foreign teacher with a real rough accent. And I'm taking copious notes like I always try to do. And he was saying, and the theory of this and the theory, and I'm writing down T-E-R-Y. And finally somebody next to me goes, he's saying theory. And I'm like, oh, geez. And I was like, and I remember thinking, like, man, this is killing me. Like, I've got theory all throughout my paper. What's going on here? And then the other class I had was accounting. And we had one of the most attractive accounting teachers. And I remember I spent more time watching her walk back and forth across the front of the lecture hall than I did taking notes. And I said, I can't focus on numbers. It was just too much. And I remember I look back, and now being an English teacher was it. And I think we did so much writing. I took critical thinking in writing. I took a composition course as electives. And I remember walking away from those courses my freshman year, and kids being like, oh, he gave me a C. Oh, he gave me into this. And I'm like, what did you get? I was like, I got an A. And I started realizing, maybe that's my route. I was like, I really enjoy it. I don't mind reading the books, reading the stories. I don't mind writing the papers. Maybe I should go as an English major. And I changed over to an English major, and that's sort of where I stuck. And was glad that I did, because I love the fact, even now, 20 something years into it, man, doesn't matter what's going on in the world. You can always bring in an article. You can, if something's going on, there's always something that you can work on, comprehension, go into, using textual evidence, and, bring in what's going on in the real world. So it's not like we only read Shakespeare and, other authors. We bring in real world stuff, and it's fun to have kids related to what's going on today. And I was glad that I did that. Not that anything against math, but it wasn't for me. I was too bored in my math classes. So
That's so interesting that you were, and again, that's like something that's common with a lot of students that I've talked to, of kind of going one certain path and realizing this isn't it, and pivoting out. You mentioned then you left Susquehanna.
yeah. So my sophomore year, my parents got divorced. Rough time. Both parents were like, "Hey, I can't afford school." As my dad said, my mom was like, "I can't afford school." So I was like, "Okay, I got to pay for myself," and I've got no heads up. So it's not like I've got
Mm,
money aside that I need to do. So I came home and I went to Monco for a semester or two, and several of my good buddies, my ones that unfortunately corrupted me in high school, they were a year younger than me, my senior year, and they would take me down to South Street, and we would grab a six of Moosehead and do stuff that we probably shouldn't have been doing as seniors. That it's definitely our parents didn't know, and and sure enough, one was at F&M, one was at Millersville. And I knew Millersville was a much more affordable school.
mm,
So after being a semester at home, and I had been away for school for 2 years, and I knew I definitely wanted to get a college education. I would be the first in my family to do so. But I had aunts and uncles. My dad's four sisters all went to Morgan and were educators. And two of my dad's brothers went to Morgan and were also, one was in education, the other got his degree in something else. So I knew, out of my family, my sister, she decided school wasn't for her. My younger sister, she hadn't picked any. She was still in high school, but I was like, I definitely want to go to school and get a degree. So Millersville had a program that you could go up and take courses. They had a downtown nursing school in Lancaster, which
mm,
is only 5 minutes. It's like going from Shady Grove to the middle school.
mm,
So I would go over to it was near F&M and to the Millersville Nursing School downtown Lancaster. And if you took 3 courses and got above a 3.0, you were automatically admitted into the university. And so I moved up there with my buddy who was from Wissahickon. I took the courses, was admitted in, and then just continued on part-time, full-time. I met my first wife at the time, up there, going up to visit my buddy who I went up there to move in with. He called me at the end of his first year at Millersville. It was my first year home because he was 2 years younger than me.
mm.
And he said, "Hey, can you come pick me up? My car broke down." And I was like, "Yeah, I'll drive to Lancaster to pick you up." He goes, "Bring stuff." He goes, "It's graduation weekend, so there might be some parties. Stay the weekend." I went up and we had great time up there. That's where I met my ex-wife, Shelly, and ended up going up to Millersville and enjoying getting my degree from there in English and education. But yeah, it was a tough time because when I still wanted to play college basketball, but Millersville is Division II. And I had gotten moved to shooting guard from point guard position when I was at Susquehanna, and going to Millersville, getting my shot off was going to be a little bit more challenging because the guards were a little bigger, a little faster, more athletic. But I knew I could still play point, distribute, because I was always had the skill. You couldn't take the ball out of my hands. And so sure enough, one of their coaches came and asked me to be a walk-on. But at that point, because I was putting myself through school, I was like, I have to work. I've got to, I've got to support myself, and there's no scholarship in there or anything like that. I just couldn't do it, So, I ended up, but I made great connections with the guys from Millersville. And every summer we would get a team. There was a pro-am league down in York, Pennsylvania, about 25 minutes west of Lancaster. And we would go in there. And it was one of the most amazing experiences because for me, as pretty much a Division III guard playing against guys from Towson, guys from East Stroudsburg, and guys that would come from all over. I mean, I was on a team. We had 2 7-footers. We had 2 guys that were 6'8", 6'9", a 6'7" scorer, and like 2 or 3 guards that were over 6 foot. And we came in like 5th in that league. Like it was that competitive of a league. And it was with the Millersville guys. So it was kind of fun and getting to know those guys. A lot of them I still keep in touch with through social media and stuff like that. So even though I didn't play, I still sort of kept up with the basketball team and playing with the guys. And, but I was just a guy. And because I was the one working, when the summer came around, they're like, "Well, you've got money. Can't you pay our league fee?" And I was like, "All right, I got the league fee." I said, "But that means I'm a starter."
Where were you working while you were in college?
Man, I did some crazy jobs. So I remember I worked, my dad was a landscaper by trade. So I grew up doing landscaping all around Lower Gwinnett, you name it, around the Montgomery County. But my dad, a lot of his customers, Fort Washington, and throughout Montgomery County. But so I knew that's a skill I had. I could do anything. And I went to a large landscaping firm called Stouffer's at Kissel Hill.
Okay.
And did there. But it was actually even excavating and regrading properties for new homes, which was a little bit above. My dad was more of, hey, we cut a bunch of lawns, we plant some flowers, but this was a really cool job where I learned a little bit more. And then I worked for a medical company, which I think it may still be Apria Healthcare now, but it was Homedco, and I delivered home oxygen to emphysema patients and patients that had lung cancer. Most eye-opening experience I ever had, because I grew up at a time at WIS where, outside the downstairs cafeteria, there's that open area outside.
Yes.
And that was an area when I went to school, students could go out there and smoke cigarettes with the teachers.
Right.
And as long as you had a pass from your parents, you could go out there. It was so crazy to see a high school student like, hey, what's up, Mr. So-and-so, smoking a cigarette next to the teacher. But as long as you had a pass from your parents and you could smoke out there, you could. And, the ills of smoking weren't really expressed or established in the media like it is today, where they know, like, hey, this can kill you. And working for that health company, going inside of homes where people, literally, they were like, do you smoke? No, don't ever do it. And it was like, I was like, this is what they should put on the commercials. Like I said, kids would never touch it, the cigarettes if they saw this, because it was killer, man. It was just, it was tough. And a lot of the patients that I would deliver for, and I did that job for 1.5 years, almost 2 years. You'd have a patient for 3 months and then they were gone. And that was tough because you're there at their house once a week, sometimes twice a week, giving them something that they need as a necessity, getting to know them, and then they pass away. And then you're having a moment sitting in your truck going, man, poor Betty or poor this person. And it was a really humbling experience. And I was like, man, it really made you appreciate what you had in life and what you're doing. So it was a unique job, even though it wasn't high paying. The people you encountered, the people you lost, it was a unique job from that aspect. And so I ended up doing that job when they had in Lancaster, and then they opened a branch in York, and they're like, hey, we need drivers that are willing to go to York and open the York branch. I was like, I'll do it, and so I did that. And when they opened one in Harrisburg, I did that as well. So I was with that company for a while I was putting myself through college. And then I finished just as I was doing my student teaching and finishing up, because I went part-time for about 5 years, and I finished up my last year like doing full-time when I had to do my student teaching. But I was working for what was called Barnes Hall Juvenile Detention Center.
Oh, wow.
And that was a unique job. We had a max capacity of about 25 kids, and it was a full 24-hour facility. So I would work like third shifts. I would work like from 11 at night, or I think it was like 10 at night till like 6 in the morning, go grab some breakfast, and I would go do my student teaching and prepare my lessons, and then go home and sleep. And I was blessed at the time. My ex-wife, she was great. I had a daughter born at that time, right as I was finishing up. So it was kind of neat to finish that up. And as soon as I finished college, I literally graduated in December of 95. I was working in January. I had met a couple principals that were like, hey, as soon as you're done, come see me, or before you're done. And they hired me even prior to.
Between Susquehanna and Millersville, you mentioned going to Monco. Monco always had like this stigma. And for me, I went right to Monco from Wissahickon for 2.5 years and got my associates. But I've definitely had some apprehension and a little bit of like embarrassment of like, oh, I'm going to Monco, 202U. What was the vibe? What was your feeling? What was the vibe of Monco back then, and your feeling of coming back?
It was very similar, but the other part was you were going to college. So that was sort of seen as like, okay, you're still going. But, I've learned over the years, that sort of ideal that we have, it's because it's in our backyard. You know what I mean? Like for us, it's like you're going to Wissahickon 2.0, you know what I mean? But if you talk to kids from Souderton, Norristown, they're like, oh, I'm going to go over to Monco down the road. But because I think it's so close to us, we take for granted that there's a community college that's right there in our backyard, that it's in our district that anybody can go to. And I think, but for me, it was like, I had no problems going there. I loved it. It was very laid back. The 2 semesters I was there, I knew I wanted to, because when I came up through, the one issue that I had was we had a lot of athletes, especially African American athletes, that came out from 80 to probably 87, that didn't go on to college, didn't go on to play anywhere. And I was like, man, I know I want to do more than just, hang on the corner, hang around Ambler, and just, not really do something, with my life. I said, I want to have a career. I want to have a more substantial job. And it was one of the things that when I came back as a coach, that I wanted to see not only all of our kids succeed, but I wanted to see more of our African American kids, succeed, and know that, hey, I'm going to start with you in ninth grade. You need to get your grades straight. You need to make sure your books are tight, so that if that opportunity comes along, you're ready to go. It's so funny you mentioned that. Last year we had probably one of the best players in the suburban one-legged kid, Matt Compass, and his grades weren't where they need to be, but he was a standout this year at Monco, and next year he's probably going to go on to either play in the PSAC at a nice Division II school or possibly a low Division I school. Tremendous athlete. But, it's one of those things like, hey, if that's your path, that's your path. And, we go over and follow them and watch the games. And Monco has a tremendous facilities now. Their school is continuing to grow and build. And I think that idea that used to, I think so many WIS kids would struggle with, is now sort of like, hey, whatever I can do even to save money. Some kids will say, I'm going to do 2 years to get my, some courses out of the way at Monco that I know will transfer, and then go to a major university and save some money that way, because the school is expensive,
Did you ever think about going into college to be, Division I basketball player, try to get drafted, NBA? Was that ever, when you were a kid, in your thoughts?
There were times when I, was in college, I thought like, man, this would be an interesting path to, but playing at Susquehanna and we played against like Bucknell every year, which was D1, and they're more of an Ivy League D1. They're not the Temples. You got a real understanding of how physical and how good the next level guys were.
Yeah.
I feel like still when I played, I could shoot with some of the best of them, but I couldn't be 6'3". Mm-hmm. I couldn't jump like they could. You know what I mean? Like my best dunk were starting dunks for guys that I played against, like, oh, how cute. You know what I mean? Like my dunks, like, oh, you got like a starter kit of dunks. Like, you know what I mean? That, like, I had 2 or 3 little tricks I could do, but they were coming out reversed in and three. And you realize like, oh, they're just at another physicality, another level of the way they played the game. And so I was like, okay, so playing in the pros, it might not be for me, but I figured I love being around the game, and coaching would be the next. I even at times thought about what would I do college level. And I had several good buddies that were coaching at the college ranks. One was down south, and he had coached at York, where I did my first teaching job. And when he got to a really nice D2 program down in South Carolina, was like, hey, what do you think? And I couldn't see uprooting my kids and moving, across. And I had such a great community experience in Ambler, growing up in our community. I just like, I'm going to stay put. I like where I am. I like my job security, and I like my kids get to grow up and be, in the same district that I went through, that my dad went through, and grow up in that same community. So for me, it was a good fit. And I think, who knows, down the road, maybe when I retire from teaching, I live now in Collegeville, and Ursinus College is right down the road. I may look to assist or do something there, next level. But playing as a player and going to that level, I think, playing my first couple of years of college, I realized how good the next level. First of all, Mr. Lowe used to always tell me, you got to get stronger. You got to get stronger. And I kept thinking, no, I'm a finesse player like Dr. J. I'm going to finger roll. I'm going to go around. And I still remember my first college practice. Our center set a screen on me. And I think we were Monday in practice. It was like Thursday when I got off of that screen. Like, I was there forever trying to fight through the screen. And I was like, oh my gosh, these guys are so physical. Even at the D3 level, I went to the weight room that day and we started lifting on a regular, because I didn't realize how physical the game was at the next level, the contact you take, and just the pushing and shoving that goes on. It was just, it was an eye opener, and I remember coming back to Mr. Lowe, my Uncle Ralph, and saying, you were right. I was wrong. I was like, Dr. J must be pretty strong. I said, because I've tried the finesse stuff at the next level and it just doesn't work. You got to have some strength to your game. Back in 2012, we had Tano Passanio, who's now playing for the Saints, was with the Chiefs, and we had Jordan Reed. And I tell you, for all the years, and even probably still to this day, not right now, I'd probably say the last 3 years since COVID, I stopped playing as much. I could get out in the court and push around. You know what I mean? Being 240, I could get a little physical with the guys. I'm not going to play them, but I could get out there and go, look, you're not going to push me around. You get a good look, I'm going to foul you. And I could get out there in a practice or something and mess with the guys. I still never forget the first time I went out there to push Tano. And that's where I was like, oh my goodness. I was like, and he had already signed with Nova at that point. I was like, so this is what a D1 athlete feels. I was like, because I mean, I wasn't budging him. I was almost afraid if he swung an arm left or right, I'd be over in the locker room. Like he just was so physical. And I remember turning to our other coaches and saying, because the other kid, Jordan Reed, wasn't much different. Jordan was 6'4". And I mean, he was like a LeBron in high school compared to most high school kids. And I kept thinking, like, we might not ever see two physical specimens, athletes like this again together. Like they were just that good, but they were just so physically stronger than everybody. And that year we went 19-3, and it was physically caused. Nobody had two guys as physically put together and could play. Like Tano wasn't a great basketball player. He was really good, but you know, that was sort of his second or third sport. Like
Clearly.
he did shot put for track and did football, but he was just such a good athlete that when he got out there on the court, if you had somebody that could guard Tano, it was like, who's guarding this other phenom they got who's physically put together? And you put your best, most physical guy on him, because you couldn't just grab any skinny guy to guard either one of them, because they were just physically, you know, put together. And just, I was like, yeah, I can't push them around in practice. Like somebody else, get them, you know.
Well, that's like Mutombo on Shaq.
Right.
Barbecue chicken, as he would call it.
Yeah. I mean, you just guys that big, you're not moving them. So.
You mentioned your kids, 2 kids?
I do. My son Chase is 26, just turned 26 in March, and my daughter is 30. She'll be 30 in May.
Okay. So did you have them through their years? It was.
Oh yeah. So what's funny is, I mean, I've coached them in WRA. I coached my daughter's soccer. A lot of the girls that she graduated, I coached when they were youth athletes. So when my daughter came through, she was on a different pod through the middle school. When my son came through, he was on the same pod, but had a different English teacher, because in the middle school, you have like, I think when you guys went through, there was a reading teacher and an English teacher. Okay. And we went to 2 English teachers, a science, math, social studies teacher on a pod. So the English classes were smaller by number, and the kids could get more individualized attention. And we did that, I want to say it might have been a few years after you had gotten through. And so my son had the other English teacher was on the pod. So yeah, so I would see them every day when they came through the middle school. And in the high school, I coached my son, which was a unique experience. My daughter was my manager for 4 years.
Wow.
Yeah. So
my worst year playing was when my dad coached our team. We were I think, as someone else just recently referred to a team, we were defeated. We didn't win a game. Almost won. Remember, we almost won a game. We lost by 1. My dad thought we had won, and he's like, "Yeah, we got one." I'm like, "Dad, we didn't get it. We didn't get it." And I took criticism, you know, especially in sports, horribly from my dad. What's the difference between coaching all these other kids and coaching your son?
Well, you know what's funny is I feel very fortunate. When my son really took, he was a football player all the way through, coming up, youth, everything. Good athlete in a lot of sports, but I thought as kids, he loves football, he's going to be a football player. Played quarterback, linebacker for AW football. Played on a team that was undefeated, unscored upon. You know, had a couple of championships. I was like, that's his sport. And then around middle school, he said, "Hey, I really like basketball. I want to get better at basketball." I said, well, okay, well, then you probably need to get involved in AAU and find an AAU team where you're going to play it at a faster level. And he goes, "I already have one." I was like, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah." And his cousin, my cousin Crunch, his son Purnell, who was 2 months apart from my son Chase, was already playing for an AAU program. And so I put him on the same team. And within a year, the guy who was coaching him pretty much was going, the parents were a little bit upset because he was disorganized, but they're like, "We're going to go our own separate way." And I spoke to him. I said, "Look, why don't you take the 2 studs on the team? those that are going to defect and try to go elsewhere, I'll try to pull them together, and we'll have like, we weren't an A+ team, but we were a B+ A- group, because he took a kid who ended up going to Auburn, another kid, like there were two other studs on this team. And I said, I'll coach him. And that's where I started coaching my son there in AAU. And then when he came up to high school and when I took him in AAU, not knowing all the backgrounds of AAU, I'm one that dots the I's and cross the T's. I want to make sure whatever tournament we're in, they can't say you can't participate because you didn't fill out this paperwork or do this. They had a thing called the Positive Coaching Alliance. It was an online thing that you were supposed to take before you coach any AAU. Really, in AAU, as long as you say I'm the coach, they really don't stop you. As long as you've paid your money, they don't stop you. But I went through it, and there was a great section in there that said about coaching your own child. And I took it to heart. And one of the best things it said is that you need to establish that basketball's basketball, at home's at home. And I always tried to take that to heart and realize that, no other kid has to go home and be within, a couch earshot of me. No other kid has to go home. And when I'm watching video, hear me go, God damn it, why don't we do this? So I can't, pick with him. So pretty much, if we had anything to say or dispute there at the gym as coach and player, once we got in the car, I love you, son. We got to, leave that behind. And it really worked well. And my son, because he had such a strong background in football, and I thank every day the guys who coached him in football, they were tough, they were good for him, and they never took it easy on him. He was one that could take a good bit of yelling, and I had to tell him right up. I said, look, I'm going to need to be tougher on you than anybody else. And he sort of gave me a look. I said, if any of these kids for any reason think that I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt, I said, you're going to be the most hated guy on your team, because they're going to think like, oh, he gets to get away because he's coach's son. And that team, though, we had the kid Tano and we had the kid Jordan. My son ended up that year being our point guard. And there were a couple of times where he might have thrown the ball away or something. And man, I ripped paint off the walls, yelling at him in the huddle. And the first thing he saw was one of the guys, Jordan or Tano, put their arm around him because I was so tough on him. And I remember saying to him into the car, I said, do you remember when I got on you? He goes, yeah. I said, what happened? He goes, Jordan put his arm around him. I said, yeah. I said, it's better to have them on your side than them against you. I said, so know that I need to be that guy to you often. And it was tough because when my son was very fortunate that year that we went 19-3. He hit some big shots for us. One of the best games I've ever coached. We played CB West in the most packed gym I've ever been in. Like, it was ridiculous. There was perspiration coming off the ceiling. It was so hot and humid in the gym. And it was a double overtime win to get to Temple to play for the district Final Four. My son hit 2 huge shots in the overtime. And I remember in those games, like, I can't cheer him any different than I cheer anybody else. If I'm with dad in the stands, I would have been going like, that's my kid. But as you're coaching, I'd be like, hey, good job. Let's get back on D. And I remember one of my son's close friends who was down at Temple in his sophomore year. He messaged me and said, hey, coach, he goes, I just want to say thanks for the years of coaching me. He goes, and I was talking to another buddy. He goes, I never thought about how tough it must have been to coach your own son. And it was one of those ones where I was like, wow, thank you. Because it was. And not tough from the aspect to coach your own, but it's tough to not cheer your own son, but still let him know I'm so proud of you beyond just being my player, and it was a balance to have. And it was just, it was unique. And I'm excited. He's one of our assistant coaches now and helps out with the team. Oh, cool. And, being our probably Matt Compass, the kid at Monco, scored 1,000, but prior to him, my son was our most recent 1,000-point scorer. And so the kids take to and listen to what he has to say because, he's done this. He's played the game at a very high level. He's carried team, to a state tournament and helped have major victories. One of our great victories that we always love bringing up and we always get text. You ever watch the Phoenix Suns?
Sure.
They've got a kid, Mikal Bridges. Mm-hmm. So when Mikal was at Great Valley, we had to win our last game to get into the playoffs. Mm-hmm. And the reward we got was to go play Mikal Bridges at Great Valley. They were 20-2.
Is that where he's from? Like Malvern, Great Valley area?
Great Valley, yeah. So they were the number 3 seed. and we were the 30 seed, and we beat them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So yeah, and it was one of those things. So every time Mikhail won a championship at Villanova, we were cheering him on, but all the guys from Wiss on the team would be texting, "Yeah, he didn't do that against us," and we'd always joke. But a real classy kid. I got to know him after the fact there, but it was just one of those things that it was such a neat moment to experience. Not only it was with my son, but 4 or 5 of the kids that were on that team I had coached since WRA days together. And so it was really neat, seeing these kids, and we would post pictures after that victory heading into to districts in the States of those guys all together as WRA players, like in 5th, 6th grade. And now, playing, against, future NBA, Mikhail Bridges and great guys. So,
where'd you meet your wife, your second wife you mentioned, right?
yeah, my second wife. So, it's funny, the year my son had his best year of basketball was the year I ended up going through a divorce. And I was, trying to figure out, okay, it was a tough divorce. It was a tough, breakup. And my buddy who was at Millersville, who I went and moved up there with, said, "Hey, I'm going out to Tex-Mex over in North Wales." And he said, Barry's going to be there. And I'm like, Barry Ray Rudolph? He goes, from back, when we were in high school. He goes, yeah. And I was like, man, I haven't seen her in years. And it was an old friend that he had dated, back before he was married. And so we went to Tex-Mex and we were hanging out over spring break about 10 years ago. And we started chatting, and I was like, hey, we should hang out. She's like, hey, pal, you're married. I'm like, not anymore. I'm not. And, she's like, oh, and she was a teacher. She was teaching in the city of Philadelphia at the time.
Oh.
And, I was teaching, I said, hey, we have spring break open. We should hang out. And we sort of went from there as just being friends. And then we went on to, like, hey, let's go catch a movie. Let's do this. And, we sort of just really enjoyed each other's company, and, became more of a couple, and,
so she was from Ambler too?
She was from Hatboro. When she finally graduated high school, she worked for a little while at a couple restaurants, and then her and a girlfriend, which I always still think is amazing, decided they wanted to follow the sort of grunge band scene and wanted to move out to Seattle.
Oh, wow.
And they just hopped in a car, the two of them, made it halfway across the country, ran out of money, waited tables for a couple weeks, stayed with a friend midway through, and then made it the rest of the way out to Seattle. And then she ended up putting herself through school years later and became a history teacher. And then she did a semester abroad in Ecuador and then a year in Costa Rica. So, and then she eventually decided she wanted to be closer back to her mom and her brother and her family. And she moved back. And that time when we were at the Tex-Mex was like maybe her 3rd year back or so from Seattle. And we just sort of connected. And she didn't want to really marry. She'd been single her whole life. And, and then after we were together about 5 or 6 years, she said, hey, you know what? My sort of ideal on marriage, I think, has changed a little bit. She was, I think I would like to get married. And I was like, I would too. And about 4 or 5 years ago, I proposed, and 3.5 years ago, we got married. So
that's a great story.
Yeah, it was neat. And it's awesome. My kids call her their bonus mom. We have a great blended family relationship with my ex-wife, Shelly, who it's always funny because my ex-wife, the mother of my kids, she's a huge basketball fan.
Mm.
And her and her boyfriend still come to a lot of the Wiss games. And he's a great guy, played at Kutztown. And it's funny, she's still the intense person that yells at the refs. And every now and then I would get a ref going like, isn't that your ex-wife? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, she still comes to the games. And I'm like, yeah. I was like, well, she knows other kids from the community. And so I know my wife, my ex-wife, my daughter, they all sit up in the stands.
Rolling deep at the games.
Yeah, they're like, I don't know how you do that. I was like, it's a whole, I said, you ever see the movie Blended? I was like, that's sort of one of those scenes. We all get together and, we all get along. So it's been a blessing.
Oh, that's so great.
Yeah.
At what point did you think, so you finished teaching, your teaching classes. At what point did you decide to come back to Wissahickon? You had mentioned that there were a couple principals that reached out.
So I tell you, it's a great story. I ended up at York, city schools, teaching at Edgar Foss Smith Middle School. And when we knew our daughter, when Logan was getting closer to age to go to school, York was, I loved my time in York, but York at the time, I think it had the highest percentage of hate groups per capita or something like
Oh,
that
wow.
for the county of like any county in a bunch of places. And I was like, wow. And I was like, I don't know if this is the place I want to raise a biracial kid, you know? And so my ex-wife and my wife at the time, Shelly, said, well, we should look back towards Philadelphia. And I was like, well, Wissahickon's a great area, but we didn't know if we could afford being in that area. You know, I was on a starter's teacher salary. She worked in sales. And I took some interviews. I interviewed at Solderton. And I forget what the other school was, and then in Wissahickon. And Solderton offered me a position, and I verbally accepted. And the next day, Mr. Snyder, who had been my middle school principal, called and said, hey, we'd like you to come in for an interview. And I was one of those guys, hey, I gave my word, I can't do that. And I remember my wife at the time, Shelly, saying, you don't owe them anything yet. Like, you just gave a verbal. You can go take the interview. That's where you've always wanted to be, is at your alma mater. Like, and I went in, I did the interview, and they offered me a job. And Solderton wasn't happy. You know, I think they were also they didn't have a lot of teachers of color. So they were thinking, man, got a male teacher, English teacher. And so they weren't happy, but I was pleased. I was going back to Wissahickon, where, you know, I grew up, was, you know, born and raised. And so that's sort of, you know, where I came to. And then I sat out my first year from doing any basketball coaching. They asked me to coach baseball, and I was like, I don't know baseball. I stopped playing in like seventh grade. They're like,
Get hit.
they're like, but you know, kids, you can coach baseball. And I went over to Tim Stokes, who I graduated with, Mr. Stokes, and I said,
Get
hey,
out.
yeah, we
Graduate
had
with
classes
Stokes.
together. Yeah, Mr. Stokes and I, and what's really great is when I was playing high school basketball, we had a group called the Fun Butts. That was our fan organization. And he was part of that. So they were the crazies across the court, you know, always cheered us on. So we were really good high school friends. And I went and asked him, hey, what should I do, you know, drills wise in baseball? And I basically picked up how to break down practices and things like that. And then I ended up getting the JV position. And I wasn't sure when Jack Spinella got sort of moved out, the head coach, it was, I didn't like the way in which it was moved out. There was some accusations of racism and stuff like that. And I don't think that was it. And I was sort of like, hey, if you want the guy gone because he's not a good coach, that's one thing. But to besmirch his character or you know, say something like that about him, I said, I don't think that's right. And I sort of was like, I don't, you know, I really didn't want the position. And they had already pretty much told him they weren't bringing him back because the administration wasn't going to help support him against these accusations. And so Danny Capolella, Earl, I think it was Finnegan, it might have been Brady. They came to my house and were like, Coach, you got to take the job. And I'm like, guys, I'm not feeling good about this position. I'm, you know, like I love to coach you guys, but like, I don't like the way, you know, Coach Spinella was moved out. And I called my buddy that I played college ball with from Susquehanna. He was coaching at Allentown College at the time. He said, look, he said, if the opportunity's there for you to take, he goes, take it, do it the way you feel it's right. And he goes, and if things go a different direction, they go a different direction, but at least you did your best to, you know, do the job the way you feel it's supposed to be done. He goes, somebody else may get that position and you may not get this opportunity again. And I was like, huh, it's an interesting way. And I really feel like I was blessed in that situation. We were 7-17 under Coach Spinella. And the next year we went 17-7 and flipped the season. And, you know, it's one of those things where like, hey, you don't want to do too good. They're going to expect this all the time now. But I was really blessed that he had played so many sophomores and we had a great crew coming in there. And man, it was just such a great experience coming in, teaching in the community that I grew up in and then coaching. And we moved into Bluebell over near Mermaid Swim Club. We were renting a house over there. And my neighbor was a lady, Mrs. Kent, who used to be but now it's family consumer science, but it was home ec teacher when I went through. And she's a WIS alum, graduated with one of my uncles. And she was like, hey, when I move out of my house, she goes, I want somebody that's going to get use out of the pool. And we were like, you know, like, let us know. And we ended up moving one door over 4 years later, right there in the same street, same community, you know. And
Mrs. Kent, she was was she the sewing or the cooking?
I think she did cooking.
Yeah,
cooking.
I remember. Yeah, taught me how to make biscuits.
Yes, yeah. And so she was great. And I went to school with her sons. And so it was, you know, just a neat like everything just seemed to work out right. And we were raising our kids in a community where we knew diversity would be accepted, because where we were just below York City in a place called Leader Heights, nice area and everything, but it just wasn't as diverse as suburban Philadelphia area. And that we just knew we wanted to be somewhere where our kids felt comfortable, would have a good experience. And, you know, I feel blessed that they got to go through Wissahickon, and probably even more so. I always feel like my son and my daughter have had to have, you know, 50 to 75 of the best big brothers, you know, from the basketball guys that have raised them, and through the camps we've run and stuff like that. You know, I always still remember my daughter when she was a freshman at Wissahickon. My high school guys knew, like, hey, if anybody is trying to date or hit on my daughter, if I'm not the first to know, you guys are going to run to no end. You know, it was one of those things where she always had somebody like, you know, hey, Logan, who's that you're walking with? Shut up, you know, like, I'll tell your dad, you know. So we had some fun with it. I wasn't that overprotected, but yeah, it was a fun experience.
You know, my dad's black, my mom's white. They were always, you know, my mom especially was always like very involved in the school district. I remember she was on like a committee in middle school for like multicultural diversity, to have other removed as a race option for standardized testing and stuff like that. For you, as a parent of biracial kids, what's been your experience? I think, you know, now so much more progressive. I always like to make the joke that for me growing up, like, there was no Drake. It was like me and Lenny Kravitz when I was a kid. Like, we were the only ones out there. What's been your experience with your kids growing up?
You know, I think they're very fortunate because they came through. Not only, you know, does WIS have the diversity that it's always had, there have been many biracial kids that I think, you know, my kids could identify with or relate to as they came through Wissahickon. You know, even Coach Brody and I would always sometimes joke that, like, I always look and I was like, every year I'd have like 2, if not 3, you know, biracial kids on my team. And it just so happened to work that way. And so they always, I think my kids felt very comfortable. And even where there's times where, you know, it's tough as a teacher because, you know, racism exists. You know, there's going to be teachers that don't quite have the same views you do about race. And you have to learn as a faculty member and as a parent to say, okay, how do I handle this? And a lot of times it was sometimes teaching my daughter, my son, like, okay, if this is how you feel, here's the path you need to take, you know, like, and it's tough for me to step in because I work there. You know, you need to talk to this person, you need to talk to your guidance counselor. If it goes beyond that, then I'll get, and it was trying to help them self-advocate for themselves when there was a situation, or if there were a situation where they felt, you know, like an other, or they didn't feel, you know, part of something. But I felt like they were always had a good experience. And, you know, it was always a good conversation. I don't know if Chase brought him up, because I think sometimes boys just, they move on. And Chase would just think that teacher's a jerk, or he would use another word for it. Where my daughter was one, she was a, you know, student council kid. She was one heavily involved in, you know, all the school functions. When she found a teacher that she found was not up to par, it was like, I don't get why that teacher's not doing this, or I don't get why that teacher's making this remark or treat me this way, or not electing, you know, or won't elect me because of this, or she felt color was involved. And we had great conversations about, like, you know, hey, this is going to also help prepare you for real life, because you're going to get to college and run into professors that you're going to be like, what in the world is this guy saying? Or what in the world is this lady saying? And you have to be able to learn how to handle that. And I would share with her my experiences. Like I said, when I went to Susquehanna, there wasn't a lot of diversity. And, you know, I still remember, you know, being on the court, you know, and being called the N-word, you know, and it was one of those situations where I usually, I mean, it wasn't the first time it happened, but it happened before out on the court, stuff like that, where it's not, but when you're in a college game, back then, suspensions and things didn't happen like they did. You just got kicked out of that game, you played the next game. So we were up 20, the guy used it, and I took a swing, you know, people jumped in between, and afterwards in the locker room, you know, I told the coach what happened, and their coach came over and said, oh, I talked to my player, he said he didn't say that. And I said, yeah, he would say that. And I said, what do you expect him to say? Yes, right, I called him the N-word. I was like, you think I'm just making that up? I was like, you know, we're up 20. I got no real reason to take a swing on your kid. I said, but he said something I thought was across the line. And I had to shout. And it was just, and I remember feeling a little bit on my own out there, because yeah, my teammates had my back, but I was like to my coach, I'm like, are you believing this? And it was one of those things like I had conversation with my daughter about that. Like, you're going to experience that somewhere along the line where something's going to happen where race is an issue. And, you have to be able to try to deal with it with a cool head, you know what I mean? Without losing, your instincts, your anger comes up first because you can't believe somebody used such a horrific word or something that, was used to demean and to hurt,
I never had, I think, kindergarten, first grade, third grade, fourth grade, all black women teachers. Never had a male teacher until sixth grade with Mr. Winokur, but never ever
my teacher as well.
Yeah, you too.
Mr. Winokur.
Did he have the super carols when you were there?
Yes. Oh, the super cows. Yes. I was about to ask. I was thinking I was going to age myself by saying the super cows, but I forgot he had those. He had them at the middle school, right?
Yeah.
I kept thinking like, oh my gosh, he broke those down at Shady Grove and brought them to the middle school. Yeah. Oh man, I had Mr. Winokur. What an awesome guy.
So for me, I never had can't even think of like black male teachers that I ever interacted with. For you, has it changed as far as the numbers? Do you feel any type of responsibility you talked a little bit about like from your player's perspective, just from a teacher perspective in this school, do you feel a responsibility?
And I didn't have one until I was in middle school, and it was my shop teacher, Mr. Johnson. And I think in high school, there was Miss Davis, who was an African-American English teacher. I mean, there wasn't a ton as well. But yeah, I always feel one, as a black male in the school and also as a teacher of English, you know what I mean? It was one to also, I think there's always that ideal that I need to, one, be a role model for the kids there because, they're whether it's African American kids or any kids as being I'm a coach in the district. I'm a member of the community for so many years. I always felt that, but as a black teacher as well, I felt we always needed more diversity in our schools teachers, and it was neat to sit in on some different equity seminars and Zoom meetings and talk to other schools. And there's now at the middle school, there's Shannon Gumby, Mr. Klein, myself, and there's at least 3 other African-American men in the building. And the other schools are like, what? You have 6 in your school? And they're in schools where maybe they have one. My wife, who teaches at North Penn at Penfield, there's one African-American teacher in her school. She teaches science there. And I was like, wow, that's a lot of burden, because when there are issues, kids will sometimes come and, the weight of that comes on you. They're like, okay, let's go talk to guidance. I feel very fortunate that there's Mr. Gumby, there's Miss Tracy Raleigh, there's Mr. Klein, there's individuals that they have as advocates and individuals that they can talk to when they do feel a situation is a result of race, And I think WIS has done a better job of also hiring Asian teachers, and trying to make our school more multicultural. I still think there's a ways to go with that. And there's still areas that both the middle school and high school have to get better. But I think they're trying to do, what is right to make a district be representative of their community.
Yeah. So yeah, that's one of the things I think I talk about a lot with students is a lack of understanding in other cultures. And that, we just look at ourselves, a lot of the things that we would say and talk about and do, and our opinions of students was just based off of ignorance. I didn't have Asian friends. I didn't understand the culture. Asian students have talked about, sometimes how hard it was to invite people over to their house who weren't of their culture and explain why they're eating this or why they're doing that. And these were things I never, so it's cool to hear that they're, one, I think that comes with diversity in the teachers because they're the only ones that know how to teach those.
And a great thing that the school did when my son was coming through, I remember he was in 10th or 11th grade. And I don't know if they still do it because I think, with the ideals of clearances and things of that nature, but they had them have dinner at somebody's house that's not of your culture.
Wow.
And so my son, where we were living in Bluebell, there was an Asian family right behind us. And I walked over with Chase and we said, hey, my son has a project for school to experience somebody else's culture. Would you mind having him over for dinner? It's a weird thing to ask to your neighbors, and they were like, absolutely. And he went over and they made some traditional Korean dishes. And, we came back and he told us what he did. And I was like, it's funny. I saw somebody with a t-shirt on. It was either today in school or somewhere along the way. And it was a great t-shirt. It said, make friends with somebody that doesn't look like you.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, that's a great way that we break down what you just mentioned, that ignorance of not knowing and getting to know people of different cultures. Because you're right. It's, ignorance is where a lot of our issues come from when we don't know or we're not willing to, understand somebody else's perspective and look at things, after walking a day in their shoes. And I think that it's just such a great thing. And I think, like I said, it's one of the things that I feel fortunate that teaching in a school that's so diverse, having Muslim kids and, kids of all different cultures, religions in our school, I've gotten to learn and be open and experience a lot of different, just cultures from multiple, and hear where they travel, and what they do on their summers. It's just, to me, it's just eye-opening. It's very neat. And to know that my kids were able to go to school and have friends that, they're traveling here or visiting family in Israel or doing, it's like, wow, it's just expanded into my daughter. When she did her study abroad at Temple in London, like none of my family members, like I said, my dad's one of 8 and all the grand. Nobody else has done that up to that point. And to see my daughter be one of the first kids in our family go on to study in another, country, it was just, it was really cool. So.
That's cool. You first in your family to graduate college, and then your daughter first to study abroad. Like that's, you know what I mean? Seeing those little
it was really
groundbreaking.
Neat, But I want to go back to Mr. Whitaker. It's funny.
Yeah.
So when I went through Wissahickon, we had multiple elementary schools. So I went to Springhouse Elementary School, which is now Gwynedd Mercy's elementary school.
Okay.
Right down in Springhouse. And then that was like 1st through 2nd grade. The administration building used to be Lower Gwynedd before they built that new Lower Gwynedd building. Mm-hmm. So that's where I went for 3rd and 4th grade. And then every kid in the district went to Shady Grove for 5th and 6th grade. Mm-hmm. And in 5th grade, that's where I had Mr. Whitaker. I tell you what, it's where I also, I think, really learned a joy for reading. I remember I read The Hobbit, I think it was, in 5th grade. Now, I don't know if it was the full version. It might have been an abridged version. But I remember him either reading The Hobbit to us or we read it there. And we could always lay in the comfortable super carols. And, it was, you go up there for reading it. I remember having a great experience with Mr. Whitaker. And it was neat when I came back to teach to see many of the teachers that I'd had, especially like Mr. Whitaker, that, that I was like, wow, I'm teaching with some of the teachers that were my inspiration to go into education, so.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what's that? I actually did a similar, my path was Madison Avenue, which was K through 3.
Yeah.
And then going to Shady Grove for 4 and 5.
Okay.
Before going to middle school. But for you, what was your experience getting back into now these teachers that you were calling Mr. This and Mrs. That, and is it a hesitation of first names and do I go into this teacher lounge and
I still always remember Mr. Kavanaugh, may he rest in peace. He would always say, Art, call me Art. And I was just always like, that's not going to happen. I was just like, you're always going to be Mr. Kavanaugh to me. Like, you were the guy that I remember. He taught high school social studies, but I think there was a year where he was at the middle school and I would always come by, and in his room as a associate teacher, when he didn't have class, we had the old big TVs that were up in the corner of the room,
mm-hmm.
The big tube TVs, and he would have on like CNN and he'd be working at his computer. And I was thinking, like, that's what social studies teachers do. They watch world news as when they're in their off periods. Like, how boring, The middle school student, like, I'd have on the Sixers or I'd have on ESPN or something. But I just always remember it was so formal. And when I came back, he was one of the nicest guys. And 2, he would always I was like, hey, Mr. Kavanaugh, like, Art or mm-hmm. Arthur. And I was like, okay, Mr. Kavanaugh. I was like, I just couldn't bring myself to say it, So, and it's funny now being a senior member in the language arts department, and there's new teachers. There's a guy, Sean Stovall, who went to Springfield, Montgomery County,
okay.
And he's my son's age, 26. And teaching now 6th grade in our middle school. And every time I say, Sean, call me Kyle or call me Coach, he's like, all right, Coach Kyle. And he's got to put Coach with it because he just can't say Kyle and call me by my first name. I was like, that's fair enough. I said, I'll take Coach Kyle. So, but and so I know it's funny to watch somebody else go through the thing because he's always like, you're Mr. Wilson or Coach Wilson. I can't call you by anything else. I was like, when did I get that old that they're struggling to call me by my first name? So
that's funny.
Yeah.
I always love to talk pop culture, and I'll give you the option. You can pick your time at Wissahickon, or you can pick your time teaching at Wissahickon, since that was my era.
Yeah.
Favorite artist, music, album, band, anything that you remember of that ilk?
Well, I'd probably say of my teacher, Jay-Z. I'm a Jay-Z guy.
Nice, same.
I also enjoy Drake. I was very fortunate. 2 things happened in the music.
Well, this has been a really good talk, Coach.
I do, but I've always been a Jay-Z, and my daughter, about 12 years ago, right when I first started dating my wife, got us tickets to go down to Jay-Z and Justin Timberlake down at the
Legends of the
Lincoln
Summer.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm gonna tell you right now, my wife is one, like I said, she's one that followed the grunge scene, Pearl Jam, like she's been to concerts. Still to this day, she says it's the best concert that she's ever been to. And it was just, we danced in the aisle, and it was right there where Jay-Z and Justin Timberlake were hitting that sweet spot of just music you could dance to, you could feel good, but it had the cutting edge of Jay-Z. And it just, it was, so I'm really a huge Jay-Z fan. Because I think of the current age of my players and my son, like, I enjoy Drake as a more modern one.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if there's ever be another Eminem, like there's certain, to me, icons of rap, the heavy hitters that just, like they hit in the era when I came through. They're like, man, their music. And when I was coming out, my high school days, it was Run DMC.
Right.
And to see where rap is, and not only was it Run DMC, it was an era of, we had to argue constantly and debate that rap was music. Like,
right.
There were kids a lot, and that were like, it's not music. It's not, because a lot of the kids I went to school, it was rock and roll. It was, things like that. And they were like, rap's not a thing. And we were loving, hip hop and the rap culture that was coming out at that time. And we would actually, at football games, guys like Will Smith, Fresh Prince, DJ Jazz, there would be flyers coming around that people would hand out in the football stands, will be performing at Cheltenham High School, at, this high school. And so you would get those and you would try to beg your parents, can I go see this? And it was a lot of young kids, very few chaperones, and these DJs and guys that would get up and just mix and rap. And it was a cool era. So when I got to Susquehanna, I remember guys on the basketball team, we would walk across campus to the frat house or coming from frat parties doing Run DMC. One guy doing the beatbox and somebody else doing, Peter Piper Pick Pecker and Rum Rap Rhymes. And they would just go through and rap the whole way back. And we were just like, it was like a great time. And so when we got to the more modern rappers that, were just doing so much significantly more with their rhymes, with their end rhymes, with their, internal rhymes of what lyrics they were putting together, it was like, wow. Like, it just was, it was just really cool. And just the depth of what they were saying in their lyrics just was always so cool. So
favorite Jay-Z album? Jay-Z's my number one guy too. So favorite album?
Probably the Black Album.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm one, I love today's modern technology because I like going through and just popping on the Jay-Z channel on Pandora or going on to Apple Music and going and just listening through. And I was also a huge Public Enemy fan.
Oh,
like,
okay.
It was an era of like, this is music I can listen to, but my parents better not hear me because there's some cursing in there. And there was such a political consciousness to it about, fight the power, And to me, one of the great songs was by Public Enemy, Welcome to the Terror Dome.
Yeah.
And we always thought that was a battle cry because we played in the Dome Gymnasium at Wissahickon. And so we would always like try to talk, let us play Welcome to the Terror Dome, and we, us, the tough Wissahickon kids that we
Oh,
were,
yeah, yeah.
and some of them living at the end of cul-de-sacs, but we were like, we're going to be the rugged, rough kids. Let's play some Public Enemy,
Yeah, from
and
the bad streets of 309.
right, right. So, but it was just, those were artists that I really enjoyed, coming through, and obviously culturally, Stevie Wonder, Michael Jackson were ones that if they came on the TV, man, your parents screamed, "Get in here!"
Mm.
And you watch them because in the '70s and going into high school, you didn't always get to see a ton of black artists on TV. And Michael Jackson, who became the king of pop, was one. When he was on TV, your whole family sat around and just watched.
Yeah, so were you like that was always like the lore. My dad was also big Mike, so I always hear about like the Motown 25 when he did
Yeah,
the moonwalk, or when Thriller came out and
yeah,
like everyone
yeah.
sat down in front of the TV, and things like that don't happen as much anymore.
And I even tied into the pop culture of then of watching, a Sanford and Son or watching the Cosbys, and I tied in. I loved seeing you have Hank Jones on, and knowing he's worked with Blackish and now with Grownish, and then what's the one he's doing now?
Bel Air.
Bel Air, and I just think that's so neat. You talk about 6 degrees of separation. Hank's father and his uncle Warren, they were some of my dad's first employees. My dad, like I said, was a landscaper by trade,
Yeah.
and so Hank Sr. and his brother Warren and a bunch of those older guys that were, when I was like 7 or 8, would be out in the front yard during the summer, ready to work, cut lawns.
Wow.
Hank's dad became a pilot, stuff like that. But my dad would always have the night before Thanksgiving. A lot of people go to PJ's or go something like there.
Mhm.
They would all come by my dad's either on Christmas Eve or the night before Thanksgiving, and they would have beers with Mr. Calvin or Mr. Wilson, who was their first job employer and stuff like that. So
Oh, that's
it's neat
cool.
to see where young Hank is going on. I'm like, man, look how that kid's grown and just, blossomed into such a great, writer, a young man. So I was like, what a neat Wissahickon, just watching these young guys and now being a part of creating a new pop culture,
Any movies from growing up that were like big for you?
anything. Eddie Murphy was huge for us. 48 Hours, Trading Places. Like we just, still my buddies that are Wissahickon guys. We're actually meeting PJ's tomorrow night to do a little watching of the NCAA tour, or Thursday night for the NCAA tournament. And there's certain lines that come from Beverly Hills Cop or
Yeah.
48 Hours that we still can will repeat, and we know exactly where it's from. There's one great line. I was always a bit of a practical joke, like I said, and they would always go, "Yeah, Kyle, I'm not falling for the banana in the tailpipe trick." And that was an old Beverly Hills line where Eddie Murphy was making fun of the guys. "Oh, you're not falling for the banana in the tailpipe trick," and it was a line that we would always use, and it just those movies are just still they'll never be old for us. And the
Timeless.
one that probably tops it, Scarface.
Oh yeah.
We would watch Scarface like over and over, again, the whole drug scene, the mob scene, the cartel and all that. We would watch Scar because it was sort of a one that even in high school, you weren't sure you're supposed to be watching Scarface,
Oh my God, the
Bloody
bathtub scene with the
shooting, yeah.
chainsaw. I'm like, yeah. Well, so the season just ended about a month ago. When I think back to the basketball program when I was in high school, I remember, of course, I remember that flip
Yeah.
when you guys had your real successful season. I guess I was in like 10th or 11th grade. But I remember like right before that was when Kobe Bryant was in the area and he
Yeah.
would play teams and it would feel like for like maybe the playoffs games would get big for Wissahickon, but then when with Kobe and then you follow like what LeBron was doing, you see like there's these really big high school programs who have to rent out these stadiums. But then over the last couple of years, you talked about like the cheering section that Mr. Stokes was kind of like in charge
Yeah.
of, and I started following. I realized that Wissahickon has like a fan group. And
Yeah.
I started
Fans,
following.
FANZ. Yeah, they're awesome.
Yeah, and I started following them, and I started following Earl, and just seeing
Yeah.
kind of the craze that's the team really has, the program really has. That for me,
Yeah.
really only existed when you were just starting out, only existed for the football team.
Right.
And to see now that the basketball team, from you, how do you see the program has grown in the last 10, 15 years? And where do you see it going in the
Well,
future as sports gets huger?
I think, we've been consistent, and our battle is constantly the pendulum swings back and forth. And right now it's swinging a lot towards the private schools. They snatch a lot of our kids and our talent. But what I always love, and to me, it's always a great feeling. I love the community kids that want to stay and play. And I'm always wanted. It was great this year. Our second game of the season, we played Germantown Academy. Their starting center and their best player in the game was a kid I taught in 8th grade. We would go back and forth and talk trash. He was a Cowboys fan, Eagles fan. So I had to keep a straight face. I mean, we talked every day was a joke about Dallas and Eagles. And the kid, Blake Smith, great kid. It was nice we beat him. You know what I mean? One of their guards was also a kid who was their best 8th grade player when he came out of the middle school. So, I look and go like, man, you could have been a part of what we have here. But they had, like I said, kid went on great education, great. So I'm glad that our kids have that opportunity to go on and sometimes play against those that left for greener pastures and say, hey, look, you could have been part of what we're doing well here. This year, I always say about every 3 or 4 years, we have a season to remember, and I think that's what a community high school team should be. Now, our big rival, Upper Dublin, obviously, they had a huge downswing. They've been really good the last couple of years, so we've been competitive. We split this year. PW, who has always been really strong, but a lot of their players aren't from their community. You know what I mean? They get a lot of kids in 10th grade, 11th grade, legally, as they would say. But, but I've always been one, with kids and parents, we even say, well, how come, you don't do that? Why don't you get kids from, that come in from Philly or whatever? I said, I can't imagine having a kid that's come to camps, gone through our middle school, come to watch high school games, get to his 10th grade or 11th grade year, ready and worked his butt off. He's been loyal to our program and saying, you're going to sit because this kid from Upper Marion or Methacton or Shelton is going to come. I even had a parent call me the year that we went 19-3, the best player for Cheltenham. His dad called and said, hey, I'm really thinking about bringing my kid over to your school and playing at Wiss. And I said, look, I really appreciate that. It's flattering. I said, but I don't feel comfortable right now digging in Brian Johnson's backyard. That's the coach there. I said, I wouldn't want somebody doing that to my players. We're a public high school. I said, if you move and you're in my district and you want to talk, that's fine. I said, but what we're doing right now, I said, feels pretty unfair. And it's really, you're not supposed to be doing it, tampering with another team as a public school, because if he's moving, it's supposed to be for academic reasons or, because they have to move, not for athletics. And I just remember thinking, I know I could sleep well at night knowing I didn't have to move. I mean, like I said, it's a 19-3 team. We had really good players. I would have hated to see one of those players who thinks like, man, I'm going to be a starter on a great team sitting or being 6th man or 7th man because we brought somebody in from another school. I'd rather win with my community kids because I think it's something neat and special when they can look back and see their years from WAC or where maybe they were the 14th guy at the middle school and now they're a starter and they've made something of their high school career. We've been fortunate to play in the state Final Four a couple of times in the district Final Fours, and have great seasons. And I really think the group that just graduated, I felt bad. We ran into a Norristown team that we had them down by 8 at halftime and then we couldn't. It was a Achilles heel of us all year that we would have games where we just struggled to score points for a quarter and a half. And after scoring 28 in the first half, we scored 8 in the second half and lost to Norristown, who went on to play, in the district, either Final Four championship, went a couple games in states. We ran into a good team and lost to them by 12 points, But I think because we only had 3 seniors, the group with Earl, who's a phenomenal player, and some of the other supporting cast around him, we had a very young group. One of our kids, Dom Vacchiano, is a sophomore who'll be a junior. His dad played for Wiss. He was 10 years behind me. So it's neat. These are kids of Wissahickon parents that I think is great that are now playing, for their same high school that their parents went to. There's something to me that's special about that they're watching their kids play in the same building that they played in, playing for, in the same colors and having a chance to hopefully do something special. I feel blessed to be able to be their coach. So sort of a fun thing, to watch that.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Coach, this has been an awesome conversation. And whether you did it intentionally or not, I told you, you said 85 and I go, oh, I was 2 years old. So it's nice that you put in there that all these kids that I played grade school with, now their kids are playing for you.
Yeah.
So turnabout is fair play.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not lost on me when I see a kid come through like, wait, did I coach or teach your parent? Yeah. So yeah, it's wild. So.
Wow, man, this has been a great conversation.
Yeah,
I appreciate it so much. Yeah, absolutely.
I feel very honored. Very honored.
This was like really, really interesting. Again, like you coming in after I was already in the high school, and just seeing it from a fan perspective of the games. I did like I think like at my junior and senior year, I did some of the play-by-play. So like that was for WTV. So that was like that was awesome. It was like the bulk of like what I got to. So I didn't really get to know you very well. And just again seeing you on Facebook and following the team, I thought it was gonna be a really interesting conversation, but I never knew how deep your roots really went here or in Ambler at Wissahickon, and including with your kids as well.
Yeah, well, and like I said, and to me, one of the neat things is I love the fact that when I talk to an Eric Fenstermacher, when I talk to a Matt Brady, when I hear like, hey, how's this? And they still are connected to some of those guys. I always say, I feel like I've done my job, like, because look, you may never win a state championship, but really your extracurricular sports should be more than that. It's the connections you made, the battles you had, the friendships, the time you supported a teammate or you helped a teammate through a rough. And I always feel like when I go out and I go to a PJ's or I go somewhere, I still see those same guys connecting and communicating. I think like, man, what a great thing. Because I still communicate with a lot of the guys I went through from my community that went to Wiss. And this past winter was neat. Drew Moyer came up from Atlanta and he gave me a call. We've been trying to connect for a while, right before the pandemic. It didn't work. And so we met at PJ's. And it just so happened we met after a Saturday practice. And so when we walked in, over at one of the tables was at least 7 to 10 of my basketball players.
Wow.
And one of them was Earl. And so I walked over and I said, do you know who this kid is? And he's like, no, I'm not sure. I said, that's Earl Stout. And he's like, oh my God. He's like, I played with your dad. And it was neat to see, connecting those dots for an alumni who like, they played 3 years together. And now he's looking at my starting point guard who he played with his dad. And I was like, man, I think, I feel blessed from that aspect to, still see those guys and hear them talk about. And that's why I always love watching your Instagram posts and your reels of, we were in high school, we were friends in high school, and thinking like, man, that's neat to hear their stories and their, because I'm an educator, I'm a community member, I'm an Wiss alum. So I always feel like hearing those stories are special to hear the great experience and even some of the rougher experiences that kids have had going through Wiss. So I think it's all part of that experience.
That's awesome. Well, thank you, man. The last thing I do want to do real quick now, because you're a middle school, you're not in our yearbook as faculty, but I do want to flash you because I always like to give people a little look of themselves from back in the day.
I'm nervous.
I know, right?
Oh yeah, that's me, Billy Richardson. Have you ever interviewed Billy?
I haven't gotten a hold of him yet.
Man, that's one person. All those guys. I still Tommy Gangemi's come out to games. Joe Brown, I used to run into from time to time in Ambler. And now Ann Hammond. I always want to say Ann Patterson
right.
And Justin. They bring their kids to my camp. I see them all the time. Just it's neat when I look at that picture way back when and see a lot of those faces. And Billy's still the one that I threw. Keppert, I always like, man, and he'll always tell me what Billy's doing. I was like, man, I said, you got to tell that boy at some point when he's in town to let me know. I'd love to buy him a beer and see how he's doing. But it was a great year. A lot of fun.
So many big kids. Bill, Drew, Evan, guys that were just like these huge, I was like 6'2", 6'2", 200 plus pounds. But like, those are the guys that would just like, I would just go, they look like they're grown. They look like they're 20,
And Big Evan, may he rest in peace, man. I love that kid. I always used to remember, and people would always say to me, like, how come you don't do this? I said, look, there's only so much you can make a kid do. He's got to want to do the rest. And I would come into practice and Evan would be laying on the high jump mats down the corner or do something. But yet he'd step on the court and hit every shot. I was like, if we could just get his conditioning, to where he could get up and down the court. Big E. And I remember following his whole rap, career,
E
double.
Yeah.
So
that's funny. You describing that. That was like the first half of Embiid's career.
yeah, right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Great stuff.
Oh man. Well, Coach, thank you again so much. This has been a lot of fun.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Always great talking to you.
Absolutely. And we'll keep in touch, and I guess you start to revamp for the next season and take it from there.
Yeah, we start next week, so we're looking forward to it.
Awesome. Well, thanks again.
Thanks, Brad.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care.